Susan, do you,
Yeah,
Hi.
Rabbi, do you see me?
I do.
Good morning, Miriam.
Steph, I'm glad I'm seeing your face. I only saw black before.
Karen, what did you want to ask?
no, do you send out the Zooms yourself or does somebody do it for you?
Somebody does it for us. We have
Yeah.
a communications department.
Thank God for that. It's
Once you sign up, they remind you every week. So
They remind you every morning and every week.
That is such a mitzvah that this temple does for us.
It's
Yeah,
incredible.
Single
Agreed.
morning, they're reminding us.
that's wonderful.
yes, yes. Hi, Lori.
Hi, nice to be
You.
able to join you.
Nice to have
Carol
you.
Levy here.
Hi, Claudia.
Hi, Miriam. It's so nice to see you. And nice to
Thank
see that
you.
you put lipstick on even on Zoom. Good
Oh,
for
you sound just like my mother.
Okay. Hi, Susan Ehrlich.
you.
Hi. It's so nice to see everyone. Carol, I'm waiting for you to open. Lori.
I'm having a problem.
Ay, ay, ay.
Marvin may be here.
Let's see. Roy. Nikki
Thank you.
is silent. Look at this. We're really getting a nice little crowd. This is a fantastic topic. I'm very excited to talk to you about this. I've been interested in this since my 20s. I've always found it amazing and most people don't know about it.
Wow.
While we're getting on, I just want to let you know, even though you're getting all the announcements, that this Friday night, Cantor Lisa Peacock and myself will be doing Shabbat services, and our guest will be Dr. Diane White Clayton, Dr. D, our African-American
She's
sister from who's, the singer, and she's more than that. She's a professor of music. She's a minister, to talk about what's going on. And she's going to be we're going to ask some kind of difficult questions. We already planned it, and I hope you'll join us at 6 o'clock.
What day? What day?
Friday night at 6 o'clock. Karen, I'll forward you the information.
I'll tell my sister, yeah.
Yeah. So, waiting. I'll just wait another. Wait, somebody just. What was that?
Roy, we're outnumbered, Roy.
I know.
Well, Harold's here too, and Robert.
Robert's there too.
How is everybody?
Good.
Robert?
All right.
Like Jeff was worried that there weren't enough guys, so.
Okay. We can
Hi,
be in the minority.
everyone. So while people are still hopping on, let's just start with our bracha, with our blessing to learn. Baruch
Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chanu
Ishtanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Be engaged in the study of Torah. Amen. So how many people actually printed out the stuff I sent to you? If you did, okay, so not everyone. So I wanted to talk about this unbelievable charismatic character named Shabbetai Tzvi that most people never heard of, but who really influenced Judaism in profound ways for centuries afterwards. And what he is, and I'm going to go into detail about him, but he was proclaimed the Messiah and declared a Messiah all over a lot of the Jewish world in around 1660. He lived in Turkey during that time, and it was a time of real pain for Jews historically. For a couple of 150 years already, there was a lot of pain. First, there had been the Spanish Inquisition, which started in 1492, but went all through the next century and even into the 17th century. And then there was this terrible pogrom in 1648 that most people never heard of by this Ukrainian Cossack, Khmelnytsky, his name was, where he massacred 300,000 Jews in the Ukraine. It was a horrible, horrible, brutal, it was a Holocaust. It was horrible, killing them with knives and swords and just burning them alive and horrible. And there was also other wars going on. And it was a time of turmoil in the world, and the Christian world was also talking about the return of Jesus at that time. You may know, like 1660, 1666 was like this, going to be this mystical time when Jesus was going to return, or the Messiah was going to return. So there was a lot of, and the way that a lot of Jews were dealing with it is they became very ascetic. They fasted, they hit them, they whipped themselves, they deprived themselves, trying to bring on the Messiah. They were desperate. So this guy, Shabbetai Tzvi, is born in 1622 to a middle-class family in Smyrna, which is Izmir today in Turkey. And he was born on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, which you know is the holiday that we the fast day where we mourn the destruction of the temple, both temples. So it was already an auspicious kind of birth. In retrospect, he decided that. And also his name, Shabbetai, I was surprised because I read it and I checked it, is also the name of the planet Saturn. And there was a mystical idea that the reign of Shabbetai, the hot wood, when Saturn was, prominent, the Messiah would return. So he had this name. The reason, by the way, that Saturn is called Shabbetai from the word Shabbat, apparently it's the slowest moving planet. So it's like slow, like Shabbat, you rest. So that's why they call, but it is the name in Hebrew of Saturn. Anyway. So he was raised, to study Hebrew. He knew all this Judaica. He was a really great student. And he was actually declared like a hacham, like kind of a rabbinic source, but he was only really interested in the Kabbalah. Now, the Kabbalah had started, had been going on for centuries, but it became very popular a century before in Tzvat. And when Isaac Luria, this famous Kabbalistic rabbi, moved there in like 1560s, but then it sort of spread all over Europe and the Middle East. And there was a famous Kabbalist, Vitali, who had lived in Tzvat, and he lived in Italy. So he was fascinated by this. Now, according to like this, my Jewish learning source that I found, they say he was bipolar, but he definitely had this idea of grandiosity, and he thought that when he was 22 years old, he decided that he was the Mashiach, that he was the Messiah. He declared himself to be the Messiah, but nobody listened to him at that time because people were, there were other people doing it, and they went, the rabbis actually, he insisted, banished him from his hometown. And so he went to Greece and Turkey, and he would keep saying, I'm the Messiah. And they kept kicking him out because people were very suspicious. And then he went to Egypt, and finally he went to Israel, and he went to Palestine, and he met this man named Nathan the prophet. And he was a mystical teacher, kind of like John the Baptist to Jesus, they say, because he recognized that he was the Messiah. Now, before that, why was he kicked out of these other things? Because he decided that he is the Messiah, so he created a wedding for himself between himself and the Torah. He married the Torah, and they said, you're insane, and they wanted to kick him out. And everywhere he went, he would talk about him being the Messiah and having mystical visions from God, and kind of trying to prove it by the fact that he was born on Tisha B'Av. His name was Shabbetai. And he put on, mystical events, like he promoted himself with this marriage to the Torah, and he had a big festival where he invited people. And then the rabbis of, this was in Salonika, they kicked him out. And he kept going from, town to town, obsessed with this idea of being declared. Then he met a very wealthy Jew in Cairo who was very into the Kabbalah and the Talmud and all this stuff. And he, I'm reading this because I can't remember it all. This man was named Raphael Joseph Halabi, and he himself led an ascetic life, and he fasted and bathed in cold water and scourged his body. And he was using his money to support the poor and bring the Messiah. And when he met Shabbetai, who I think was very young, very handsome, very charismatic, he just became a supporter and a promoter of his messianic claims. So then he went to Jerusalem, and he had a beautiful voice. And I guess he would like sing and hold events and preach, and people would come to him, and he was very charismatic. And he would go to graves and cry and of, you know, pious people and say, I'm hearing, you know, he thought he heard voices. They were speaking to him, and he would give candy to children on the streets, and he started to get a following. Now, what happened was, at this time, there were terrible taxes in Jerusalem on the Jews, because this was being governed by the Ottoman Empire, and they didn't have the money to pay these taxes. And I mentioned this very wealthy man that liked him in Cairo. So he went there. He said, I am going to save Jerusalem. And he went there, and he got this rich man to give him the money to pay the taxes. And then he became very, very popular. And people sort of date his beginning of acceptance like miracle making from this, bringing this money from Cairo. So at the same time, he started to try to fulfill prophecies to impress people. And in the book of, I think it's Amos, it talks about marrying a prostitute. You should marry a prostitute and redeem her. Susan Ehrlich, did you want to say something? You're muted. You remuted yourself. I don't hear you. Uh-oh. She's got this special, okay, well, tell me when you're ready. So there was a young girl who had been in the,
I think.
What did you say? Hosea?
Hosea?
I think it's Hosea. So there was a young girl named Sarah who had been in the Khmelnytsky massacre in the Ukraine, and she escaped to Jerusalem, and then she started to support herself as a prostitute in Jerusalem, and she was very beautiful, and Shabbetai married her. He married her because he said this was part of the prophecy that he should be married to her. And he said, as the Messiah, he was bound to fall in love with an unchaste woman. So he heard about her, and he brought her to Jerusalem, and she was beautiful and also charismatic, and but they were very sexual. So it added this sexual component to his preaching, and you know how sex and love is all part of, you know, when the Messiah comes also, it says you don't have to follow all the mitzvahs anymore. You don't have to do the same things because the Messiah is here. In fact, it says the only holiday we'll have to celebrate is Purim for some reason. That's what they say. But the rest of them, we won't celebrate. We don't need to. We don't follow because the Messiah was here. So he started promoting this idea of you could kind of break the rules. And yeah, you're right. It's Hosea. He talks about how he was commanded to take a wife of whoredom as the first symbolic act of his calling. So then he met this man, Nathan of Gaza. So Gaza was, you know, a city back then, a prominent city. His name was Nathan Benjamin Levi, Nathan of Gaza, and he decided he was like Elijah, and he was announcing the coming of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, which was Shabbetai. So if you ever read, anybody ever read that book Compulsion about Leopold and Loeb? Anybody ever? It's such a fantastic book. It's an old book by Meyer Levin. It's an amazing book. Leopold and Loeb were these two young, very wealthy boys in Chicago in the 1920s who came together and ended up they committed the perfect murder, they thought. And they were caught, and then Clarence Darrow defended them and got them life in prison. But what the psychologist said is that these two only in combination could have created this crime. It was the chemistry. And I think like Nathan of Gaza and Shabbetai Tzvi are like Leopold and Loeb in that the chemistry of the just two people with their own psychological damage or whatever you want to say together became this powerful unit that was able to propel this to this degree. So in fact, so the time that actually they started to declare him the Messiah was 1665 and 1666, which was exactly the time that, you know, the Christians had been saying the Messiah was going to happen. And he said that Nathan announced that in the Messianic age, it would begin in 1666, he was 1605, and the world would be conquered without bloodshed. The Messiah would lead the 10 lost tribes back to the Holy Land, riding on a lion with a 7-headed dragon in his jaws, riding on a lion. So, and it gets more fantastical than I'm going to talk to you about, but it's amazing what people will believe when they're desperate, when they need to believe and they want to believe. They can believe the most preposterous ideas. You know, right now there are all these conspiracy theories going on. I have a nephew, he's 30 years old. He studied philosophy and he went to Vassar and he believes in these crazy conspiracy theories because when you're disillusioned, I think with the world, if you feel helpless, you want to believe something. You want to believe, you know, something that will make a radical change so we listen to this and we go, how could you believe it? But they did. Does anybody have any questions or comments as we're going along? Anything they want to say? Karen, you're muted. You're still muted. Okay, go ahead.
I did a play in New York called Messiah by Martin Sherman. Do you remember Messiah?
Was it about Shabbetai Tzvi?
Shabbetai, yeah.
Yes. Well, it's a fascinating character.
Yes, absolutely.
Anybody else want to ask a question or comment anything? Sue Casa, is it your hand up or no?
We have our own world's greatest showman, not Shabbetai Tzvi.
Well,
he certainly wields a lot of influence.
That's right. That's right. And people are willing to follow people without fact. Okay. So the rabbis of Jerusalem were extremely suspicious and they started threatening followers with excommunication because they just thought it was, and so Shabbetai and Nathan thought, okay, Jerusalem is not the place. Let's go back to Smyrna. So they went to Smyrna, and as he was traveling, his reputation was already, you know, spreading, and crowds were coming out to see him, this Messiah, this guy who, you know, who had performed miracles that they'd heard, and they wanted to see him. And on Rosh Hashanah in 1665, he said, I am the Messiah. And in a synagogue in Smyrna, they blew the shofar and they said, long live King the Messiah. Now, I actually, if you had downloaded what I sent you about the Messiah, there was a picture. Wait, I can show it to you. This is like a,
oh yeah.
See it? It's a picture of like a lithograph of him on a throne and everybody declaring him the king. This was made in 1666 or 1665, right before that. It says, Shabbetai Tzvi enthroned. And this is from Amsterdam. So he was, you know, and people are like declaring him the Mashiach. And they started to refer to him as this title, Ami Ra, which was a Hebrew acronym for the phrase, Adonai Malkeinu Yarum Hodo, our Lord and King, His Majesty be exalted. Like he is a representative of God. They started calling him Ami Ra. So he became the leader of the Smyrna Jewish community with his wife. He was like a king, she was like a queen. And so his stories of, you know, marrying the Torah and, you know, saving Jerusalem and praying for souls and all this stuff, and of course, I'm sure it was exaggerated as it went through, spread all the way to Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, in Hamburg and Amsterdam. They, had centers about him, and they were talking about him, and the whole world is talking about it. Now, what would the coming of the Messiah mean? It would mean that all Jews would return to the land of Israel, would return to Jerusalem. And how would they do that? On clouds, or they would just be flown to Jerusalem. It was going to be this magical time. Now, there were rabbis who believed in Shabbetai too, and they spread these fantastical reports. And they said, here was like a rumor they were telling. In northern Scotland, a ship appeared with silken sails and ropes, manned by sailors who spoke Hebrew. And the inscription on the flag said the 12 tribes of Israel. And the Jewish community in Avignon, France, was preparing to emigrate to the new kingdom, they called it. And how did they do that? They sold their property, they liquidated their assets, getting ready, all of them, to be transported some magical way by the Mashiach to the Holy Land and the salvation. I mean, it was a fervor all over, to such a point that in England, the Christians were talking about how the Jews are going to be returning to the land, and it's the Messiah, their Messiah is coming. So then, as I said, he started abolishing, declaring halacha. He started abolishing, Jewish observances. He said, we don't have to do it. And he said that Tisha B'Av, which was his birthday, should become a holiday of eating, and that Yom Kippur should be a holiday of celebration, that there should be no more fast days. They should all be holidays of celebration. And this was a declaration that went out across the world. So here's what this was like a proclamation. The first begotten Son of God, Shabbetai Tzvi, Messiah and Redeemer of the people of Israel, to all the sons of Israel, peace. Since you have been deemed worthy to behold the great day and the fulfillment of God's word by the prophets, your lament and sorrow must be changed into joy, and your fasting into merriment, for you shall weep no more. This means all the Yom Kippur and all the holidays, no more. Rejoice with song and melody, and change the day formerly spent in sadness and sorrow into a day of jubilee, because I have appeared. Okay, so in other words, instead of celebrating Tisha B'Av, you should celebrate his birthday, for example. And there was shock, and some people were horrified at what he was saying, but a lot of people totally believed it. And so meanwhile, he also said that he would be taking over Turkey, and that the Sultan would, be his servant. And so what happened is, somebody who was a Jew who thought he was crazy reported him to like a person who worked for the Sultan, and the Sultan heard about it and said, bring this man to me. So they brought Shabbetai to him, and he said to him, he said, I'm going to put you in prison. He threw him in prison. But for some reason, even in prison, he was treated well, and he held court in prison. People sent him money, they brought him food, they visited him, it was like he was holding court in prison, even though he was in prison. And right before Pesach, he slew a Paschal lamb and and ate it himself. Like, he really was living this life of delusion, we could say. So as I said, Jews started preparing for this exodus, and they would say his name and bless him in all the synagogues. And they would say, this was the bracha: bless our Lord and King, the holy and righteous Shabbetai Tzvi, the Messiah of the God of Jacob. And they prayed for him in Germany. They prayed for him all over Europe. And what happened was the Sultan had enough. And so he said to Shabbetai, you have three choices. You stand, and we all have all my my, what are they called? Archers, shoot arrows through you, and you prove your divinity. You get impaled, or you convert to Islam. So, of course, his followers said to him, well, you should die because you're going to come right back to life. I mean, you're the Messiah. You don't have to worry about this, or you're going to go to heaven, and, you'll be with God, and you'll bless us and take care of us. And what do you think he did? He converted to Islam. Can you imagine? He converted to Islam, and he took off his Jewish garb and in September 1666 and put a Turkish turban on his head, and the Sultan made him his doorkeeper, his royal doorkeeper, which meant he opened the doors for the Sultan with a salary. And people were so this really is like today in a weird way. He did this terrible thing, and 300 families converted with him because they said, well, the Messiah, it's all part of the plan. Whatever he did, it wasn't wrong. It was all part of the plan, and they converted with him because they knew that what he was secretly doing is going to reconvert all the Muslims to Judaism by becoming a Muslim. So, and then he had his wife also converted, and then the Sultan said, you have to take a second wife to prove that you're really a Muslim, and he did that. Anything to save his life, he did. Well, this devastated all of Europe, if you can imagine. People were horrified, devastated, ruined. They had given up all their property. They had impoverished themselves all over Europe based on this fantasy. And even though some of his followers said that he was the true Messiah, as I said, but he was, basically just destroyed the whole community. Though there is a group to this day, they're called the Danme in Turkey, who are followers of Shabbetai, and that they're Muslims, but they still practice some Jewish customs. There's about 300 of them still in Turkey to this day. And eventually he got kicked out, from the Sultan, and he died in isolation in Albania in 1676 on Yom Kippur. So he was born on a fast day and died on a fast day. And after him, Judaism changed. And that's what's so fascinating. So how would you imagine Judaism would change from this? I would love to hear your ideas. How do you think it would change?
It's not that Judaism changes. The problem is, how does a self-deluded population of that generation change? How do they realize just how foolish they are? And usually that causes a massive reaction in the opposite direction, so that the rigidity of a religion becomes really important again, because it represents safety for these self-deluded people. And the people, unfortunately, haven't changed. Our psychology hasn't.
Some of that is true. But other things happened as well in not just becoming more rigid, actually. But Talia, did you have your hand up? Sorry. I need to
unmute, Talia.
Talia, you're on mute. Yeah, put your glasses on.
Well, I had eye surgery, so these are prescription too. But
okay. So what did you want to
discuss anyone? Anyway, a couple things. One, I would think that it would be that the Torah and the rituals surpass man and an individual opinion, because that's idolatry. So the other thing, though, is it reminds me of like Last Waltz in Vienna, that book. I can't remember the author, but the idea that when the Holocaust was happening, there were a lot of Jews that didn't leave because they didn't, like, what are they going to do with the piano? They own property, they have a life. And so they were in denial for the reverse. So it was almost like, that's human nature to, you weigh out. I mean, I don't think it's fair to call them fools, because people need something to believe in. And also people get comfortable with their lifestyle, the opposite, where the Holocaust is happening, you hear rumors, but you cannot fathom that it's true. And again, like, how do you give up everything? So the flip side is, hey, if this is God's intention, but it wasn't, it was an individual. So I think it's where God is not at all based on individual.
Okay. Any other thoughts about it, Merle?
I think it goes back to what you said earlier about the whole conspiracy theories being discovered in order to find it created in order to find yourself a comfort zone. I think that people are there are people looking for something. They're desperate and they don't know what they want. They don't know who to believe. Not comfortable with their Judaism or whatever. And they go looking for something that's going to make them feel better. And that's where they go.
That's where they go. And one group led by this man named Jacob Frank in Germany, they were called the Frankists, said that, well, we didn't go far enough and we really need to break all the commandments. And so he advocated a complete debauched lifestyle to bring the Messiah. He said, we're not bad enough. And so the whole idea was sexual excess and eating pork and doing everything opposite. So that was a small splinter group. We know that we had the very rigid rabbis in Lithuania who studied the Mitnagdim, they were just completely focused now on Talmud. But the big result was the Hasidic movement, because the Hasidic movement has two things. They did three impacts. First of all, this idea of a charismatic leader, they picked that up with the idea of the Rebbe or the Tzaddik being the charismatic leader who was considered a conduit between people and God. So this idea of a charismatic leader, people were used to and they seemed to like very much. They also still wanted to have Kabbalah, because there's a lot of Kabbalah and mysticism in Hasidism. But the other thing at the same time was that learning a pure heart and adherence to the Torah surpasses rabbinic prowess, because all these rabbis had followed Shabbetai Tzvi. And they said, it's not about that. It's about loving God, cleaving to God, and the simplest person and every simple act can be imbued with holiness, which was a great comfort to people, that you can do the smallest good deed and it impacts the world. So that was, and they say that this, I live in Pico Robertson, and on the block next to me, there's a huge sign, a big silk banner that says Mashiach. And this idea of bringing the Mashiach back is still very Hasidic, a big Hasidic belief. And some people believe that Rabbi Schneerson, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was the Mashiach or a representative of the Mashiach, if you recall. And people go to the graves of a number of rabbis and pray to them as if they have mystical powers to this day. That all comes from Shabbetai Tzvi, that had never happened before, where there were these charismatic leaders that seemed to have powers. And even though he was a fraud, this idea seemed to be very appealing. And it's even today, people go to Reb Nachman's grave in the Ukraine, and they go to other places. Yes, Susan.
Oh, I was just nodding in agreement, but I think those who go to the graves of the sixth and seventh, fifth and sixth Rebbe in New York, it's a type of mystical thing, but it's not crazy like Shabbetai Tzvi.
No, it's not crazy, but they still believe he can answer their prayers. I mean, I'm not saying that's crazy, but I'm just saying they do believe that. I don't know. Just a second. Sue Casa had something to say.
I was just going to say, for fertility, don't they go to the grave in Israel of
Rachel.
Yeah.
They do. They do. Risa?
The Hasidic rabbi has lights on his grave so that if he rises again, they will not miss it.
I didn't even know that.
They don't just visit. They keep it
That's
lit.
funny.
They keep it lit. They keep it illuminated at all times.
And they have cameras because they don't want to miss his rising.
There you go.
I think that's crazy.
It's comforting though, and this all stems from the Shabbetai idea. And they said that actually, they said that Theodore Herzl's whole thing, this is like this commentary, that the whole idea of Zionism and Theodore Herzl was he was like a charismatic leader that impelled people to go to Israel. This idea of charisma and leadership and following, I guess to a lot of people, the idea of a Jewish state was completely irrational, and yet people made it happen because they believed in Herzl, they believed in the idea, and they believed in the early Zionists, the early pioneers, Chalutzim, actually made it a reality. And what do I want to say? So this was interesting. Gershom Scholem, who wrote a huge book, a whole thing, and revived Kabbalah in our day, he said that the split between outward orthodoxy and secret heresy, which characterized Shabbetai Tzvi's followers, destroyed the unity of the Jewish identity from within. And this, combined with the trauma caused by the false messiah's apostasy, is one of the decisive factors that explains the disintegration of traditional Judaism and the onset of modern Jewish history. So what he's saying is, in the next century was the Enlightenment, you know, and when was it, 1810, I think, is when Napoleon recognized Jews as citizens with equal rights. And a lot of young people, disillusioned by all this fragmentation, you know, rushed to the universities, rushed to create other kinds of Judaism or live a secular life and involve themselves in the arts and sciences and mathematics and everything else. Gershom Scholem saying it was this terrible trauma that split. This was also
Susan, it came before then too, with Moses Mendelssohn.
Yes, which was
in the 18th century.
1760 was Moses Mendelssohn. You're right. And Moses Mendelssohn.
Yeah, before Napoleon.
That's true. Yeah. And Moses Mendelssohn, so he lived in Germany, and he was the first kind of modern Jew accepted by the Christians. And he was educated, and he lived a traditional life at home. And then he, you know, mixed with Christians, and he dressed, you know, like a modern German person. He was a modern German. However, you may not know this, he raised his daughters to be educated. His daughter, Dorothea, I love her. She was very educated and very smart. And then when it came time to marry, he wanted her to just marry someone he picked out and stay at home and basically raise children. And she refused. And she left the home. She married a Christian. She converted to Christianity. But she and a few other of these daughters created the first salons in Europe, in Germany and in France. These were salons where Jews and non-Jews mixed for the very first time. Artists, scientists, philosophers, Schiller, Goethe, all these people went to her salons. And it was a way for these non-Jews to meet Jews, to not just see the Oriental religious Hasidic Jew, but meet all of these other Jews. Unfortunately, she had to leave Judaism to do that. And I think it's her son, her grandson is Felix Mendelssohn, the composer. Well, it's certainly a great, one of the Mendelssohns from Moses Mendelssohn.
His son, I think.
It was her son?
His son, I think Moses.
Felix? I thought he was the next generation.
I don't know, but
I'm not sure. But it's that family. Yeah. But they had to convert in order to get accepted in society, even though I'm sure you're Jewish no matter what, actually. But that was all of this rift and this moving away, according to Gershom Scholem, came from this terrible hoax, this, such disillusionment. And I think it's a credit to Judaism that even though we go through these upheavals, with the very first model, actually, what happened when we were, the first temple was destroyed and people were sent to Babylonia, and after the second temple, we find a way to reconfigure, keep our values and reconfigure it or reshape it to suit the times, to make it able to hold on to it. And I think right now, we're in a whole other upheaval for many reasons. And more people are tuning in and connecting to their synagogues right now than have in 20 years. People are saying, I never was, but now I go to Zoom, I listen, I learn or whatever. So you never know. So there any questions or comments about Shabbetai? And I don't know that we've ever had anyone like that since or before.
I have a question.
Yes, yes.
Why is it, and I'm speaking from my lapsed Christianity, I believe Christ hung around with a prostitute too, and apparently this Messiah did. And so as a rabbi and a storyteller, is there some metaphorical or archetypal role that these men with power always wind up with women of this sort?
So I wanted to write a movie about Mary Magdalene. And I did a lot of research about Mary Magdalene. That's who you're referring to.
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. That
Correct.
happened much later. The Vatican declared her a prostitute, but in fact, she was one of Jesus's first followers. She may have been a wealthy woman who gave, supported him. He was called her, his first among his apostles. She was one of the apostles. He was very close to her. There are theories he was even married to her. Magdalene just means she was from the city of Magdala, which was in the Galilee. So her name was Miriam of Magdala. And we can talk about, men and prostitutes, her leaders, but she wasn't one. And then she had two. And in fact, if you look at the Old New Testament, Jesus appeared to 3 women first. He appeared to his mother, to Mary Magdalene, and another Mary. He appeared to 3 Marys first. And then he saw his male followers, his apostles. So that's not a parallel, but I do think Shabbetai, I think, he saw this prophecy. I think any way he could fulfill prophecy and be a shocker. And apparently this woman was very charismatic and beautiful, and who knows but I don't think they're parallel, to be honest with you, because I don't think Mary Magdalene was that kind of a person. I think she was a very pious, maybe holy woman, Jewish woman, actually, they're all Jewish. So I don't think it's parallel, but I do think, power brings sexual excitement, and I think when you're sexually excited, your sexuality can travel in many directions. I think a lot of powerful men seem to follow that path. We know some of our presidents did.
What about powerful women? You're being a little sexist there, Rabbi.
Well, they may be sexual, but they don't go to male prostitutes.
Right.
They may have affairs.
Right.
You're right, I don't know.
You don't know? We have brothels here in Nevada designed just for women.
I have to check that out.
Well, that's because it's Nevada.
Okay,
Look,
Talia, did you want to say
I can
something?
arrange a trip for all of you ladies, honestly. If you need a bus or whatever, I can.
Thank
help
you.
out.
A pilgrimage. Talia,
Hi, am I unmuted?
Doorbell.
you're unmuted.
Okay, so I think that whole idea of good versus evil, if you look at a sexual woman as evil, that's a storyline. But also, if you look at just the extremes, like you have Bill Gates, who's given so much, like what a philanthropist. And now he's being the sacrificial, like let's throw him under the bus because people need a scapegoat when they're under such pressure. But to take someone who's done so much good and to all of a sudden put them at the helm of like this conspiracy theory, I think it's unfortunate human nature, sick human nature, like not spiritually healthy human nature, to go to such extremes and to think that you have to put that much weight on one person to be the redeemer of good or the redeemer of evil.
I think you're right. And people are feeling helpless and they look around and they want something, some kind of leader, some kind of, I mean, the level of disbelief you had to suspend to follow Shabbetai Tzvi is incredible. The level that you would have to accept that goes against logic. And a lot of rabbis said, some rabbis followed him, a lot of them excommunicated him, get him out of our town, he's insane. But people, especially in this terrible time of massacres and persecution, need search for things. We've seen it in our own times. Search for, and not just Jewish, I'm talking about all kinds of things, you know, seances and psychics. You go to psychics, it says in the Torah, you're not supposed to go to a witch, you're not supposed to go to a fortune teller, but we've all, I've gone. I've gone to the psychic, you know, after my mother died, you know, when we're in grief, we want some kind of comfort or something. So it is human nature.
In which case, people going to the graves of the rabbi is no different than you going to the psychic.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, and it's probably, and it's more within the Jewish tradition. But I think you can also read from this that interesting things happened after Shabbetai Tzvi, which you brought up. I mean, several things. You said the Hasids, there was the Enlightenment, and then Gadim also focused on learning, Vilna Gaon.
Yes, right.
So, I mean, there were three different paths or that came out of this, which were very interesting. And there is some, as in today, there are silver linings. More Jews are connecting with temples and with other Jewish organizations because we can now do so through Zoom. So, you know, there are some silver linings even in these, you know, after this trauma of Shabbat.
I agree, but I always want, sometimes we think, oh, we're not that extreme, we're not that crazy, or, you know, Jews, you know, we never did that, but we did it big time all over the whole Europe. Yes, Miriam, you're muted, Miriam. You're muted. You have to unmute yourself. Click the little camera.
Top left, top right corner, Miriam.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted.
Good, because I kept clicking and nothing happened. It wasn't that many years ago. I know it was a lot of years ago that I lived in Brooklyn, but not that many years ago that I didn't live far from Rabbi Schneerson, who lived on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn. And people in this century would go to him as though he were a Shabbetai Tzvi, as though he were a guru, which he was to them. People from all over the world, from all over New York, plus other states. My friend who lived in Israel, her daughter was getting married. Her daughter was divorced. The young man that she was marrying was a Baal Tshuva and also divorced. She actually left Israel, went to Brooklyn, took her number to wait in this huge Eastern Parkway synagogue and wait her number when Rabbi Schneerson saw her at 3 a.m. and gave his verdict on whether our daughter should marry this man or not. Now, this was shocking to me. Here was my friend, a professional, a college graduate, a well-known teacher. She herself felt the need to go to see Rabbi Schneerson, the guru, personally. And this was not in the 16th, 17th.
Right.
So I just want to say that Chabad to this day holds this man as their Mashiach.
You know, you're right. And by the way, down the street from me, literally, I live on Canfield, south of Pico. And on Canfield and Pico, there's a huge red brick building, which is a replica of the apartment in Brooklyn, the apartment house in Brooklyn where he lived. It's right there on Pico. It's a red brick Brooklyn apartment house building. That is where the Chabad, right there. And there's one in Jerusalem as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
The one in Jerusalem is waiting for him to rise.
Wait, one at a time. Risa.
The one in Jerusalem is waiting for him to rise from his grave and move back in.
Right.
Yeah, so you can see it right here. I mean, who else hasn't spoken yet?
I should say that you should read, has anyone read Joseph Telushkin's book on the Rebbe?
No, I haven't read that one. I've read many of his books.
And I also,
there's a question, Rabbi.
Yeah. Did you read the Rebbe? He, rather than put him down, as I seem to be hearing here, where people believing, yes, there were levels. He did a lot of good. And he usually helped people come to decisions on their own. And if you read that book, Cory Booker went to him, Shirley Chisholm went to him, various presidents even went to him. And he, one that stuck with me is how he helped Shirley Chisholm. She was elected in an urban area, and she was put on a farm committee. And she said, "What am I doing? My constituency are urban." And he said he helped her come through to think of what she could do with the farmers, and they developed a program of helped. This is a long time ago that I read it, but it helped to the farmers. So he was giving, and for other ones, he was giving advice, or he was helping them through to make their own decisions.
Now, the Rebbe was highly educated. He graduated from the Sorbonne. Correct. He was very smart, probably extremely psychologically astute, and could read people. You know, should I marry this person? And he looked at them and he seemed very unhappy and nervous, and he said, "No, you shouldn't." Or yes, you know what, I'm not talking about the Rebbe, but the idea that after his death, because he never said he was the Messiah, never.
Correct.
After his death, we're talking about people's need to, you know, project that onto him and go further than that. But he was a brilliant man. He helped a lot of people, and I don't think anyone means to put him down. So I certainly don't. I have a lot of respect for him. Carol, you wanted to speak.
Well, I think that in today's world, we're needing to identify with leaders, good and bad. And there's a weakness in a lot of people that they are like sheep, they just blindly follow. And I think this is why Shabbetai became as huge as he did, and it's still today. I think.
I think in times of trouble, in times of strife and stress in particular, you're looking for some relief, psychological, emotional relief. Why is this happening? You know, especially after those horrible pogroms and all those wars. So I totally agree with you.
Given that history.
What'd you say?
I say, given history.
Yes.
The good, the bad, the ugly, and everything else from self-delusion to self-aggrandizement. Do you believe in any way that people's intrinsic psychology has improved 1 ounce since the beginning of society? I don't see any improvement in character, in the ability to be motivated or disillusioned or anything else that psychology, or let's say learning, just doesn't seem to hold.
Well, all right, before I
disagree.
respond, okay, I wanted to hear what Linda had to say, and then that's a good question. Linda.
It's a little bit on the side here, but just given everything that's going on now, one of the things that we look for is someone to step up in terms of the current movement. There doesn't seem to be a strong leader.
Yes, but I mean, perhaps, I mean, it may evolve.
Like a Martin Luther King or someone like that, not, someone who really could inspire people, as opposed to the opposite of what we've got with Trump.
Right. Well, I think we all realize that, but I think that perhaps one of the messages is that we can't depend on one person. We shouldn't expect it. What's wrong with us? If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? I mean, it's like, when is somebody going to do something? Why don't we look at ourselves and say, well, what can I do? And maybe the danger is because we're always going to disagree with leaders. People are going to it's going to be factional. I think what's interesting at different cities, different communities are making their own decisions according to their community of how they want to handle police brutality, police funding, police this, police that. There's not one person saying you have to do it this way. And I know Dr. D is going to talk about that. She says, this is my view, but there are many views. And in response to Jeff, and I want to hear other people, I think now more than ever, we can avail ourselves to information as much as we want. And then, I don't know. I mean, we don't really know. You're right. Have people changed? Are people better? It seems like there are a lot of, we don't know. I mean, the Holocaust just happened, 75 years ago. So I don't know. Merle.
Rabbi Nanus. Oh.
1 second. And
I don't know that people are better, but I think people are starting to think. And I don't know that they're thinking about going to synagogue more or doing all these Zoom things that a lot of us are doing. In my case, I belong to 2 temples, so I'm doing it everywhere. And in some cases, they think I'm crazy. But I think some people are starting to think more responsibly about what has to be done.
Well, we'll see.
Maybe.
We hope.
I hope.
Robert?
Yeah.
And Claudia. Then Claudia.
A couple of quick things. Anthropologists say that our bodies are a 10,000-year-old machine that hasn't evolved since then. The second thing is, I do feel a certain amount of sympathy with this movement that occurred and the reasons it occurred. And I think it brings me to a question that I think is interesting to ask specifically. What is a spiritual experience or a connection to God? How do you get there? And very relevant, even to our Zoom today, who are the people that help to facilitate that experience? And it really, I think they were trying to do the same thing that we're trying to do. And it's such an elusive thing, what a connection with your spirit is, or what a connection with God is. It's always a question we have to ask, even though we know a lot more today about cults than they did back then.
Okay, before I respond, I want to hear Claudia.
Yeah, going back to what Jeff said and his question, given the level of sophistication and education that we have attained 400 years later, I think this is, it's proof that we're definitely not better and we're probably worse.
Okay.
And I'm not, human nature in general, I'm not just talking about credulity, but human nature in general, that we are where we are, despite the scientific strides and the widespread access to education. So I'd like to be a bit more hopeful and positive, but I don't know.
I think, you know, this is the thing about free will or free choice. The Torah, I mean, all religions, the highest part of all religions offer the same thing, to connect to your higher self, to love humanity, to help, to raise our souls by having compassion, you know, pursuing justice and having, you know, and help and charity and kindness. We know all that. I think, Robert, to answer your question about the spirituality, one of the pluses of like this Zoom thing is we can find inspiration from each other now. It's not just a leader and we're sitting quietly in the sanctuary and the rabbi's talking. I can find it from you, and we can all find it from each other.
I agree.
And that may be a new path to just talking and sharing and learning. It's going to maybe lift us all up together. That's my hope.
Oh, I totally agree. And I just think that we're all so analytical and scientific today, which I have no problem with. I'm that way myself, but I think it really is good to ask the fundamental question of what is a spiritual experience and where does it come from? And how do we facilitate it in each other? Yeah.
And also, there are many kinds of spiritual experiences. This, for me, in a way, was a spiritual experience. Just learning with you, hearing from you, sharing with you. I know I'm going to end this Zoom, which I'm going to do now, I feel uplifted. I feel like my day is so much better than it was before I got on. And I want to thank all of you for that. Wait, did you have a last thing to say, Talia?
Yeah, I just had a question about that. What was his name again? The one that became that took down.
Shabbetai Tzvi.
Oh,
Yeah.
Shabbetai Tzvi. You know,
When
you can
he-
download my
Yes.
study guide. It has all this stuff, a lot of stuff in there.
But when he was leading as the Messiah, what were his repercussions? I think that's the thing, is like when I go to you or Rabbi Leader, I know that, like what Susan said, it is a discussion and I could come to you for guidance, but ultimately you allow me to have my final decision. Whereas in some lines of worship, if I don't do what you say, I'm going to hell, or I'm going to have repercussions that are negative. So I find it to be a beautiful thing that our Judaism. So I'm super grateful, and I love you guys.
And I love you all too.
I love you too.
Thank you so much.
Shalom, everyone. I hope to see you 6 o'clock on Friday with Dr. D. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Rabbi, thank you.